Okay, well, a really big thank you, Tony, for joining us today as part of this sort of thought leadership sessions that we're doing at the moment in EdTech. It's a pleasure to have you on board. I know we've known each other for a long time, so welcome to these sessions.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, I'm honoured to be part of it. I think you've started a bit of a trend, actually. I've seen several interviews like this amongst our EdTech colleagues since you started doing them. So I'm giving you credit for that.
I don't know. I think it's amazing how many people definitely are interested in getting involved, which is good, and that's been great. And I think hopefully, I think it's just like yourself. I think people want to hear people's opinions of what's happening in the marketplace, and it could be that you're a founder of a business and they want to understand that, or it could be as you are an expert in the sort of MIS field. And data, and obviously people wanting to understand a bit more about that. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Yeah. Well, as I said, ultimately we've sort of known each other for a long time. So in the sense of, mind you, I don't know why I accented that long time, but we've known each other for quite a long time. Worked together in Sims. You've sort of been in the market in the sense of the education space for a very long time. In fact, you started as a teacher. Was that correct?
Yeah. So the potted history is I started as a teacher, and I've basically had a career of kind of two halves. One as a teacher, so I ended up being head of science in a secondary school. Then moved into EdTech and worked with a few different companies. So sometimes I've changed, sometimes the company's changed ownership, and had probably most roles that you can think of around the sort of MIS space, sales, marketing, latterly, obviously, as you know, product. But yeah, and also from, the biggest company would have been Capita. But then when I first started, it was a bit more at the startup end where you were doing all the jobs, envelopes one day, training the next day, service desk the day, sales demonstration the day after that. So yeah, certainly been around in that neck of the woods for probably best part of 20 years. Oh dear, makes me feel old to say it.
Yeah, indeed. But do you know, it must be about the same time we must have entered into the MIS space, because it's probably about 20 years as well, equally for myself, which is quite interesting. But you've also just more recently, you've gone out on your own, so you're now consulting.
Yeah, so latterly wanted to get a little bit of a work-life balance. So I really only want to work part-time, and so set myself up as a consultant. It's been 10 months now, and it's really interesting. Never quite sure how these things are going to pan out, but basically my clients are either people looking to invest who just want sort of market intelligence, or there might be bigger companies who've got a project to do that they maybe haven't got time to do themselves, or there are smaller companies and they just want the hand in a sort of general business development kind of sense. And a couple of those are startups as well, so they're kind of new to the market, so they don't have that experience, so that's the value. And so so that it's panned out probably about a sort of 50% working week and a 50% not working, which is kind of what I wanted. So yes, not been a bad first year really.
That's great, isn't it? No, I think more and more people are working out what they actually want from a working life, and what true working life balance is for them. It sounds like you found it for sure. It's good.
Yeah, so it's served me well so far. So yeah.
So you're still heavily. I know you one of your clients definitely is in the MIS space and data. Yep. So you're still keen on data. What you can do with data?
Yeah, actually, obviously my experience lends itself to MIS, but I kind of branched out a little bit more from that. So not by any stretch of the imagination are all my clients sort of MIS providers. I have done some work for MIS providers, but seem to be sort of branching out. And it's actually, it's been really, really interesting to sort of be involved with lots of different companies. Because obviously, if you've got a full-time, reasonably responsible job with one company, like when we were at Capita, kind of consumes a lot of your time. Whereas actually now, partly because I've got the time, I'm kind of poking around lots of different companies. Even if I'm not working for them, I'm talking to them. And I think what that gives you is it gives you it gives you a kind of bit more of an overview of what different EdTech companies are like, strengths and weaknesses, what works, what doesn't work, which obviously then helps for, for being a consultant. So it's quite interesting. It reminded me when I left teaching, actually, because when I was a teacher, I'm consumed by the activity in one school. So you kind of know that school, but actually when you come out of it, like I went into EdTech, suddenly after a year, I've probably been in tens of schools, and you start to see from a wider perspective what's a good school, what's not a good school, the importance of headships, leaders. I kind of learned that after I left, ironically, but it's a similar thing now. You're just able to get that broader perspective, which in turn helps you to do the job better. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. You sort of, I suppose you get so involved in the day-to-day sort of tactical stuff of a certain business, when you're actually working for one single business, that it stops you focusing so much on the wider horizon picture. Sometimes you're not careful.
Yeah.
Where actually consultancy, you do give yourself time to do that. You're always thinking about how to help the business improve and strive, future-proof itself, and so on.
Yeah, and sometimes just talking to people, because you talk to people a lot. You're engaged with businesses. You might talk to them. You might not do any work with them, but you're talking about the possibility of what you might do, and then you might end up not doing it, or it might be something that's putting a marker down for the future, but you're still learning about that business all the time and how it works, what makes it tick. So yeah, okay, I guess in theory, in those other jobs, you're supposed to do that, but you kind of never have time to do it properly. But now, now I do.
It's a smaller percentage, doesn't it? Ultimately, when you're in those businesses, you're still dealing with all the day-to-day politics as well. So you got all your meetings to go to and everything else, which then reduces the amount of time you may be looking strategic.
A very small percentage, 3 days a year at bet, I think, is what it boiled down to. No, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean.
I do know what I mean. There was a lot of meetings in Capita. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So it's sort of bringing it back to the sort of MIS space. There's obviously been a lot of change in, since you probably left Sims as well. But overall, over the course of the last 3 years, there's been quite significant change. And probably to the MIS market overall. I don't think it's just Sims. I think Sims sometimes, gets some of the sort of big sort of headlines and stuff like, when it's back to sell and things. But actually the MIS market full stop has been changing for a number of years now. Some of it's slow, some of it, a bit more fast. What do you think have been the most significant changes over the last, say, 3 years or 4 years?
It has been interesting over the last few years, and plenty of other kind of commentators have been talking about the kind of effectively the consolidation of the market, the idea that big companies or investors are buying up MIS systems and other systems. So what seems to be going on at the moment is people with deep pockets are basically acquiring a portfolio. And you've got lots of big wealthy companies now with a portfolio product. So MIS is actually becoming just a part of that. So it feels like it's becoming less a thing in its own right and more a part of a portfolio of things. And I guess what will happen is people will want to be pushing the cross-selling, so that they're kind of buying market share in a sense, and then they've got a portfolio of stuff to cross-sell. So I think that's one thing that we'll see happening. The other thing is, and we sort of see it from people like Juniper with their national data set, is that they've gathered up so much data now, they can actually offer new products and services based on all that data. And so they've got their national data set for benchmarking. So I think the change almost isn't within the MIS systems. So back in the day, we were kind of battling it out on I've got this feature, you've got that feature. We seem to have elevated ourselves at the moment from that to, well, we've got an MIS and we've got X, Y, and Z, finance system, HR system, or whatever it is. And so the battle, if you like, is going on at that sort of portfolio level now, rather than the actual MIS system level.
Yeah, I agree. And do you think more consolidation is going to happen then?
Well, it's, I guess it'll continue. Yeah, I mean, sticking with Juniper as the example, don't seem to be shying away from buying up more and more stuff. So I think, they're obviously going for it to try and get a really, really broad portfolio. But I think at some point there will have to be some sort of additional change, because actually people are just collecting stuff, and that's not the same as developing stuff. So I think, I think at some point there needs to be a bit more of a focus on things like MAT solutions, or solutions for groups of schools, obviously, is what I kind of really mean. And I think there are some that have, I'd call it a real MAT solution, where a MAT is an entity in its own right within the system. I think there are a lot of multi-school solutions, or things purporting to be multi-school, but I don't think that's the same as being a MAT solution with a MAT as an entity in the product. So you can be a member of the MAT, but you don't have to be a member of one of the schools. And then I really think there's a little bit of a centralization theme going on. So I think, yeah, it's all very well to collect a portfolio of stuff and get a lot of market share and a lot of revenue off that, and then maybe some cross-selling, maybe some additional products is fine as a strategy. But I still feel like there's room for actual kind of new products, particularly around groups of schools. Because I know MATs have been around for a long time, but it still feels like, from a software provider perspective, it still feels like they're underserved to me. And I just feel like there's opportunity there to get centralized systems, to have proper MAT solutions, and offer those all the benefits, because I don't think they're reaping those benefits quite yet.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think there's it's like when you talk to IMP and stuff like that. They've actually built as a budgeting solution directly for MATs, and then and I think fundamentally, most products, and probably naturally because that's where they started from, started from a school basis, and then they've sort of, as Academization happened, and then as MAT sort of, the multi-academy trusts started coming in, then sort of had to develop their solutions to become, more of a multi-school, as you call it, sort of solution, rather than MAT first and then school second sort of type thing. And actually, when you speak, like Rowena, who was on one of the chats as well, absolutely, believes in that. Absolutely believes that lots of the products are very school based, and not really, even when they're selling or when they're messaging, it's not really, hasn't got a very strong MAT focus.
Yeah, and it does seem funny that in some ways, I don't know how it compares with other industries, but it does seem like a long time coming in some respects, because the benefits are kind of obvious, aren't they? Commercial benefits, economy of scale for subscriptions and licenses, but not just that. Also a kind of commercial economy of scale for things like training and consultancy. And the idea of configuring it centrally, or creating templates for things centrally and disseminating those, which is much more efficient, obviously, because it's done once, shared many times, but it also gives them a consistency of brand, a consistency of messaging. And then the other big benefit is the one that was kind of always obviously said, which is the data and being able to report across. So all those things, they seem so obvious that it feels like, why haven't we, mine was equally to blame, why haven't we sort of done that before? So I was talking to a MAT quite recently about the idea of centralizing their admissions, and it was literally, we can do this with one person in the center. We don't need to bother people in every individual school, and they can just, they can get on with other things. So, very kind of obvious in some respects. So I kind of makes you think, why has it been slow? And I think some of the reasons is MATs are not all like businesses. They are more or less dictatorial. And I think the ones that are a bit more collegiate in their approach have probably left the schools to, do their own thing. And then therefore in those ones, there's been no sort of urgency to say, right, you guys, really need you to all use the same system because, for the benefits. But I think that's coming. I think the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. And actually, there is a middle ground. You don't have to dictate every single thing just because you have a centralized system. You can have a kind of a group ride portion to it and then allow people to personalize it at a local level. I think you can do both.
Yeah, I agree. I think, as they get bigger, and with Gavin Williamson sort of talking about actually adding more academies to MATs and having bigger MATs, I think the whole idea of consolidating to ensure there's a consistent sort of standard throughout, I think it will happen more and more. And I think you're right. I think I think systems need to look at it as what we now offering from a MAT perspective, driven down.
Yeah, I think if you segment the market into the sort of MATs of different sizes, and if you talk to people like Josh Perry, then you'll see that it sort of almost feels like it's being led by the big MATs because they obviously get the bigger benefits because the benefit is related to the size of the MAT. So you'll see them switching to sort of more or wanting sort of centralized systems more so, and then it sort of flows through to the smaller ones. But if they're going to be more and bigger, then I think it's just going to encourage it to happen, isn't it? So
where do you see the sort of future of the MIS then? If there's more consolidation happening, if they start looking at more of a centralized solution driven into schools, so would you see that the MIS will, as you've already said, the MIS is not the main sort of driver now for some of these businesses? You've got things like HR or finance. So Iris, as an example, their finance system is in 70% of their schools, and ISAMS at the moment in the UK anyway, it hasn't got such a strong footprint. So they're probably going to drive the MIS through from the footprint they've got with the finance. Can you see that all the management tools become this sort of centralized sort of one-stop shop, as maybe Bromcom would say? Is that the direction of travel? Will there be a HR systems, MIS, finance, compliance and sort of asset management? Will all that happen centrally, in which case it needs a one-stop shop? Or are you more of a favor of best of breed? So, some form of platform, but best of breed.
Yeah, do you know what? Instinctively, I'm a kind of best of breed kind of a person. But it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think it depends what you mean by one-stop shop. I mean, I don't, schools typically, if you do the survey, schools typically have 20 to 30 systems. And I know, companies are building up portfolios, but they're still a little bit separate, the systems. It's a collection of systems at the moment. Maybe they can integrate them seamlessly, but that's always proven to be difficult in the past. And I can't help thinking that, do you know what, 20 to 30 systems used in a school typically, can you as a one-stop shop provide the iterative improvements that people expect in the 21st century to all of those products? And I'm kind of not convinced that you can. So probably not in favor of a one-stop shop. But then I think on the other hand, and we've had this discussion in the past when we worked together, it's a kind of what is the MIS exactly? So I think if you could kind of work out what the MIS was and where the scope of it ends, at that point, you kind of have you have a kind of a one-stop shop for your MIS, having defined what it is. But then what you do is you integrate with best of breed, because you recognize that you can't do everything well. And so I think maybe getting out of the question a little bit, but it's almost a half and half. I think you need a good comprehensive MIS, but I think that will have its limits. And I think beyond that, you need to do best of breed, because you just can't do everything well. I don't think it's possible. And I think this particular thing I think some of the big companies, they tend to do projects. So what will happen is, we'll have a project to do, I don't know, a new thing, whatever it is. new app or something for teachers or parents or something, and that the project, gets allocated a budget, gets done, and then people sort of in the big companies, I think they tend to move on to something else. So the question then is, how can you possibly compete with a specialist where that's all they do? And they're on it all the time, and they're making iterative improvements. And I think that is it's just emphasized in today's kind of expectations with software as a service type products. You expect them, don't you? You expect them to be continually improved. The big companies will be doing releases daily with improvements and fixes and so on. I'm just not convinced that you can do that over a massive broad range. So, I think there's a happy middle ground is the answer between having a good comprehensive, what we would know as an MIS system, but with the addition of sort of best of breed products, and the caveat has to be that they've got to be really well integrated.
I agree. I don't disagree at all. And like you say, we've had the discussion a couple of times. It's interesting because if you go to some countries, then they just have an SIS, a student information system, and then they have ERPs and all kinds of things around it. It feels like in the UK we sort of expanded out based on there isn't one of these things, so why don't we do it? And then you saw this idea of an MIS, as you sort of said, is sort of increased. But you've got to be careful that you become a jack of all trades and master at none. And I think sometimes our MISs have got to that point. However, you've also got cost of value, and I suppose where Bromcom have been successful is because ultimately, there's an element where they go, you can have all of this for this price. And there is a point there where some people would probably prefer that in some cases. I have to say, but then I get the luxury of just asking the questions. So sometimes I'm on the fence.
Yeah, but you're right though. The other factor, of course, is the economics of it. So it might be that best of breed is fantastic, and you get the very best thing for each job to be done. But actually, it's too expensive. So what you do is you cut your costs by going to more of a single provider, and you think, do you know what, this isn't the best thing for the job, but actually it does it adequately, and for the saving that I'm going to accrue, then that's fine. Yeah, we'll agree to take the benefit of the saving. I don't know if you talk to some of the bigger mats, when you're talking tens of schools, they are big savings. And you're talking about a teacher or a teaching assistant or something, that you could spend those savings on. So, again, and it's a bit like, some people will have a free choice, some people won't. Some people will prefer to go down the economic route and do, well, I hesitate to say cheap and cheerful because that's a bit rude, but we can't always have the most luxurious solution, can we? But if we've got a particular need, then maybe we do need to go down that route. So it's going to be a bit horses for courses, I think.
Yeah, and all the MIS suppliers need to highlight their value. If they are, they're not going to be that, and they're going to be much more niche or provide whatever they do better. And the same with all the other companies around the outside. And obviously, you've worked with Applica, or I work with Applica, and they're showing that there are missions systems in these MISs, but not fulfilling the need unless, say, Applica are. So that so in which case then you've got to highlight those value points of why you would want to have best of breed and what difference it makes.
Yeah. And they're a good example. The features going in weekly, things getting fixed overnight, that kind of response. That's really difficult to do when you're a big company. Keeping right on top of everything, because you've got a whole team. You've got a whole team working on it, improving it all day, every day. Whereas, you probably spread yourself too thin if you're in a big company.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree.